Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere dry, dusty, and delicious, in a weird, crunchy kind of way. You're standing at the edge of the Nile River, the air hot enough to toast your eyelashes, and there's a smell in the breeze, a smell of earth, grain, and maybe just a hint of, slightly burnt toast. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where bread isn't just the staff of life, it's your salary, your sacrifice, your survival, and sometimes, your snack. You squint against the sun as a woman nearby slaps wet dough onto the side of a clay dome. There's no oven timer. No sourdough starter with a name like Yeasty Boy. No oven mitts or rolling pins, just grit, patience, and a strong tolerance for sand in your food. Here, baking is both a craft and a gamble. If the wind shifts just right, it might help cook your bread. If it doesn't, well, you're chewing something raw, grainy, and depressingly chewy. But hey, at least it's food. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little bakery of ours reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your journey near the outskirts of a bustling ancient village, maybe somewhere near Memphis, or Thebes, or a now vanished town whose name has long been erased by time and sand. The Nile is just a walk away, shimmering with crocodiles and promises. But you're not here for swimming. You're here for baking. The first thing you notice is the sheer dustiness of the whole operation. Fields of emmer and barley have been harvested, threshed with wooden tools or the occasional donkey, and carted back to the village on sledges pulled over logs. Not wheels, those aren't common yet. You admire the ingenuity, even as your sandals fill with grit. Bread here isn't a luxury. It's the backbone of the diet. It feeds the farmers, the priests, the scribes, and the pharaoh himself. And that's why nearly every household, no matter how small, has some kind of baking setup, whether it's a stone slab that doubles as a sun-baked griddle or a more elaborate, hollowed-out clay oven called a tabun. But before anything can be baked, it has to be ground. You watch as two women kneel in front of a large stone slab, rhythmically grinding grain with a handheld stone, called a quern. The sound is soft but relentless, scrape, crunch, scrape. The flour they're making is coarse, pale, and full of extras. Not raisins. Not nuts. But ground-up rock. Yep. The tools they use wear down over time, and tiny particles of stone end up in the flour. Historians know this because they've examined mummies' teeth, worn flat like ancient corn on the cob. You try not to think about it as you imagine taking a bite of what was, essentially, edible sandpaper. Still, it gets the job done. Once the flour is ready, water from the Nile is mixed in, often tepid, always brownish. Some people strain it through cloth, some don't bother. And then, like magic, a sticky paste is formed. There's no exact recipe. No one's measuring cups. Just intuition, elbow grease, and a whole lot of trial and error. It's warm, really warm, partly from the relentless sun, partly from the fire smoldering in a pit nearby. Someone's fanning it with a woven mat, trying to keep the heat just right. The wind picks up, lifting flour dust into the air like a slow-motion snowstorm. And here's the trick, in some cases, the wind itself becomes part of the baking process. In dry conditions, dough patties are left out on sun-warmed stones, and if the air's hot enough and the breeze just right, the crust begins to harden before the inside cooks through. Not exactly artisan sourdough, but enough to chew on until your next meal. Some scholars still argue whether these open-air methods were widespread or just an occasional hack used by poorer families or on particularly scorching days. What's clear is that baking was flexible, clever, and deeply tied to the landscape. Where modern chefs worry about preheating and convection, you've got the sun, the wind, and whatever embers you can wrangle from last night's fire. Your guide, a middle-aged woman with sinewy arms and a dry sense of humor, hands you a round, flat piece of bread. It's slightly charred, faintly sweet, and gritty enough to file your nails on. You nod politely as you chew. Not bad, you lie with your eyes. She laughs. You get the sense she's heard that exact face from many a first-time taster. As the sun begins to dip lower, shadows stretch across the sand and a sense of calm settles in. Bread, for all its simplicity, has brought people together, across class, across religion, across centuries. Whether left for gods in tombs, or packed for a dusty day in the fields, it's always there. Always warm. Always just slightly too crunchy. And so, you sit by the fire pit, listening to the crackle of embers and the rustle of wheat stalks in the breeze. You're full, not just of grain, but of history. You've only just begun. You wake up, or rather, you're still half awake, kneeling in front of a large basket full of strange, golden grains. You poke your finger into the top layer. It's warm, dusty, and almost alive with scent. These are not the wheat kernels you'd find in modern bread aisles. These are emmer grains, rough and tough, with a long beard of husk that doesn't go away without a fight. You're in an ancient Egyptian granary now, or perhaps standing in the corner of a large estate kitchen where stores of grain are tucked into ceramic jars and woven baskets. Nearby, someone mutters under their breath while picking out pebbles from a batch of barley. Yes, another bread grain, but this one's even trickier. Barley's outer shell clings on like a toddler refusing bedtime. Removing it takes time, and nobody has time. You lift a handful. The grains feel solid, full of potential, but also like they've been sunbathing too long. Egypt's climate is perfect for growing these tough cereals, but there's a catch: they require backbreaking work to turn into anything edible. And even then, you'll still get stones in your soup. Now, emmer, let's talk about that one for a moment. It's the OG Egyptian grain. You see it carved into tomb walls and listed in tax records, always the same spiky stalks with long, dangling awns. Emmer is a type of wheat, but don't let that fool you into thinking it's soft or agreeable. Unlike modern wheat, its grains are stuck inside hulls that don't separate when threshed. You have to soak it, dry it, pound it, and possibly insult it before it starts to behave. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians preferred emmer out of loyalty or necessity. Some believe they simply didn't have better options. Others suggest a cultural attachment. Emmer was considered sacred, after all, mentioned in religious texts and funerary offerings. You could call it the holy grain, if you're feeling poetic, and maybe just a little sleepy. Barley, on the other hand, had more of a side character energy. It was used more for beer and porridge than for bread, though in lean times, people did bake with it. It's cheap, abundant, and has that special, my teeth hate me, texture that only ancient food can deliver. You glance around the granary. There's a slight earthy scent rising from the grain, like warm hay, with a note of stone dust. A few mice scurry past, keeping their distance. Everything here is alive in a strangely calm way. A woman nearby is winnowing, tossing grain into the air with a flat basket so the wind can carry off the chaff. It's hypnotic. Grain rises, floats, falls. Over and over. Suddenly, a gust picks up and blows a portion of grain straight into your face. You sputter. She laughs, not unkindly, and offers you a handful of parched grain, lightly toasted kernels that crunch like popcorn hulls and taste faintly of smoke. Not bad, considering you're about 4,000 years too early for butter or salt. Processing grain is a daily job. And for the workers, most often women, elderly relatives, or enslaved laborers, it's endless. Grind, sift, soak, dry, repeat. There's even some debate among scholars about how long each family's supply lasted. Was there a daily grind? A weekly frenzy? We don't know for sure. What we do know is that everyone, rich or poor, was utterly dependent on this process. You spot a small figure, a child maybe 6 or 7, turning a grindstone with visible effort. Her arms are too small for the task, but she's doing it anyway. This is how many children contributed to household survival. No school, no toys, just grit, literal and metaphorical. You trail the freshly processed grain to the next station, a low, flat surface where it's being mixed with water. But not just any water. This is Nile water, scooped in earthen jugs, murky with silt and maybe a few mystery organisms. It's the same water used for drinking, washing, cooking, and bathing. And yes, for making dough. A lazy breeze drifts in through the open doorway. The scent of crushed grain mixes with sun-warmed dust and the unmistakable funk of something fermenting in a nearby jar. You approach cautiously. The jar is open. Inside is a frothy, bubbling mass, something between porridge and primordial soup. This, my friend, is the mother blob, a wild yeast starter, unintentionally created by leaving dough scraps out overnight. It smells oddly pleasant, sour, warm, with a faintly fruity kick. No one here knows what yeast is. No one's named their starter or tracked its hydration levels. But they've learned, over generations, that this goop makes bread rise, most of the time. A few historians suggest this was a happy accident, maybe someone left wet dough out, came back, and found it puffier than usual. Others think early Egyptians may have noticed how date wine, beer, and dough shared a certain fizz. However it happened, it stuck. And now, here we are, standing in a sunlit corner of a mud brick house, watching dough take its first sleepy breath. The grains are ready. The water's warm. The fermentation is bubbling softly in the background. You hear a clay pot crackling near the fire. The wind outside is picking up again, whispering through the reeds. Everything is nearly ready. But there's still a long way to go between grain and greatness, or at least, between flour and a somewhat edible loaf. So you sit back on a worn reed mat, close your eyes for a moment, and listen to the hum of work, the soft grind of stone, the rustle of baskets, the splash of water, and somewhere, faintly, a goat bleating in protest. Egypt never sleeps. But tonight, maybe you will. You're back on your feet, following a wide trail of damp footprints across a packed dirt floor. They lead to a cluster of clay basins embedded in the ground, each one about the size of a shallow salad bowl. You peer inside. Thick, pale dough clings lazily to the sides like it's trying not to be bothered. Welcome to the wet and messy world of ancient Egyptian kneading, where dough is mixed with fingers, elbows, and the occasional accident. There are no measuring spoons here. No exact grams or digital scales. Just instinct and the generations-old wisdom passed from one pair of calloused hands to the next. A woman stands nearby, sleeves rolled up, though honestly, she's not wearing sleeves at all, just a faded linen shift smeared with flour. She plunges her arms into the sticky mass and begins to knead, pulling and folding with practiced rhythm. Her hands are strong, her nails short and stained from grinding and stirring. Her knuckles crack softly as she works. There's a groove worn into the edge of the basin from years, maybe decades, of this exact motion. You watch, hypnotized, as she lifts the dough, folds it in, presses down with the heel of her hand, and repeats. A small child waddles by and tosses something unidentifiable into the dough. Maybe it's a figure. Maybe it's a pebble. She shoos him off without missing a beat. No harm done, probably. The dough is made of emmer flour, water, and, if the gods are kind, some of yesterday's leftover starter. Sometimes the wind dries out the mixture too quickly, so a splash more water is added. Sometimes it's too wet, and more flour goes in. Sometimes someone sneezes and pretends it didn't happen. You look around nervously and thank the Nile gods for the heat, which will hopefully kill any unintended seasoning. You ask about salt. The woman raises an eyebrow. Salt? That's a luxury. Yes, they had it, from dried salt marshes and trade with the north, but it wasn't always used in everyday baking. Instead, flavor came from herbs, honey, or, in the worst-case scenario, pure necessity. You eat bread not because it's delicious, but because you need to not die. The kneading goes on for a long time. You think about offering to help, but then remember that your modern wrists are built more for keyboards than clay bowls. Also, you're not sure your joints could handle this angle for more than 90 seconds. So you sit quietly, watching. Outside, the wind is still warm, still persistent. It picks up tiny motes of flour and lifts them into lazy spirals through the open door. Some of it settles back into the dough. Some of it finds its way into your hair. Everything here seems to be part of the bread, whether it wants to be or not. You hear a low conversation happening just beyond the threshold. Two women are arguing over who used the last of the barley starter, each blaming the other while casually continuing their respective tasks. It's oddly soothing. Background bickering, ancient style. Near the edge of the room, you notice a large flat stone with bits of dried dough stuck to it. This is the kneading slab, used when the batch is too big for the basin or when a more vigorous approach is needed. Someone pours a little water on the stone to loosen the dried dough, scrapes it with a flat stick, and begins again. Reuse and recycle, it's not a trend here, it's a requirement. Now, here's a little fringe fact for your midnight amusement. Some scholars believe that the earliest doughs were kneaded with feet, not hands. Yes, you read that right, bare feet stomping in wide bowls, like a pre-dinner dance party. The logic makes sense. Your legs are stronger. Your feet can press more evenly. But, hygiene? Well, the standards were different. And hey, the fire would probably kill most of the foot germs. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or just reserved for large ceremonial bakes or brewing processes. There's no foot kneading happening today, thankfully. At least, not here. You wrinkle your nose and hope that fig-sized lump earlier wasn't a toe thing. Once the dough has reached its soft, slightly elastic consistency, it's covered with a cloth, or whatever cloth equivalent is available. In some homes, it might be woven reed matting. In others, a thin flap of linen. The purpose is the same: keep flies out, moisture in, and give the dough time to rest and rise. The rising time is dictated by temperature, humidity, and fate. Sometimes, the dough gets a bit too enthusiastic and oozes out over the basin. Sometimes it sulks and refuses to grow at all. The women seem unfazed either way. Bread always gets made. Maybe not perfect. Maybe not pretty. But it's bread. As the dough rests, preparations for the fire begin. A small boy is tasked with gathering dried dung and kindling, a job that is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You try not to breathe too deeply. The scent of singed dung is unforgettable. He lays the material carefully in a fire pit lined with stones and taps 2 flints together. Sparks fly. Smoke curls. A flame is born. And with it, the promise of food. You step outside for a moment to get some air. The sun is still high, but the wind is stronger now. It rushes past your face like a warm sigh. Somewhere nearby, someone's singing a lullaby, slow, repetitive, in a language you don't know but somehow still understand. Bread is coming. You can smell it already, even though it's still resting. You look at your hands, dusted in flour, and think, this is not how you expected to spend your evening. But also, you've never felt quite so calm. The dough sighs in its basin. The fire crackles. A reed mat creaks under someone's shifting weight. And above it all, the desert wind keeps blowing, gently, insistently, like it's trying to help. The dough is ready. Or at least, it stopped sulking. You can tell because it has that telltale soft wobble, slightly domed, faintly puffed, like a tired pillow with dreams of becoming food. You lean in close and give it a sniff. It's pleasantly sour with a note of crushed grass and, okay, a bit of goat in the air, but that's just Egypt. Now comes the question, how exactly do you bake bread when ovens are more concept than appliance, and thermostats are a fever dream? Well, if you're lucky, or rich, you have access to a clay oven, a rounded, beehive-shaped contraption known as a tabun, tucked into a sun-baked courtyard or perched beside a communal baking area. But if you're less than elite, you rely on the sun, the sand, and a little trick called desert ingenuity. The dough is carefully divided into smaller chunks, some shaped into rounds, others flattened by hand until they resemble uneven pancakes. One woman scoops a bit of flour onto a flat rock already baking in the sun. She lays a patty of dough directly on the heated surface, covers it with a shallow pot, and places a hot shard of clay on top. Voila! It's not fast. It's not even, strictly speaking, efficient. But it works. Meanwhile, at the tabun, things get more dramatic. A fire is lit inside the dome, fed with dried reeds, twigs, and, you guessed it, animal dung. The heat builds slowly, the inner walls absorbing warmth until the whole structure glows like a sleepy volcano. Then, the coals are pushed aside, the dough is slapped against the inner walls, and gravity is told to behave itself. You watch with wide eyes as one baker moves like he's done this 10,000 times, which he probably has. Slap, press, hold. The dough sticks to the wall. The edges begin to brown. Steam puffs out. After a few minutes, he reaches in with a hooked stick and peels off a fully cooked flatbread, steaming and speckled with char. It smells, honestly, fantastic. Like roasted grain and childhood comfort, even if your childhood did not involve dung fires and clay ovens. But not every loaf is made in the tabun. Some are baked in sand pits, a method you'd assume would ruin your meal but surprisingly works. Dough is wrapped in leaves or reeds, anything to keep it from fusing to the earth itself, and buried under a layer of hot sand and ash. You wait, not unlike roasting a marshmallow in slow motion, and eventually dig up your prize, a sandy, smoky, slightly uneven loaf that still counts as nourishment. Historians still debate whether the sand baking method was a desperate improvisation or a common village practice. Some argue it was used during travel or in nomadic groups, others think it was standard fare for the lower classes or when ovens were too busy with official temple business. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle, or buried under 3,000 years of ash. While you wait for your own experimental dough disc to cook on the sun-heated stone, you take a look around. A few kids are playing with leftover bits of dough, shaping them into crude animals, probably to bake as little toys or offerings. One of them holds up a lopsided lion and roars proudly. You applaud softly. It's terrible, but charming. There's an important ritual to this process, though not necessarily a religious one. Baking bread is part science, part routine, part community theater. Everyone has a role. Someone manages the fire. Someone shapes the loaves. Someone stares critically at your dough and says it's too dry. Even the breeze seems to have its job, cooling the crust, chasing away flies, and occasionally blowing ash in someone's face for comedic relief. You reach down to check your bread. It's warm, a little crisp around the edges, and smells vaguely like achievement. You try a bite. It's dense, chewy, and possibly contains a small rock. But it's your rock, and you love it. Nearby, another woman is brushing ashes off a batch of finished loaves. Some are set aside for eating. Others are packed neatly into baskets, perhaps for temple offerings, perhaps for trade, or perhaps to be buried in someone's tomb. Bread here isn't just dinner, it's destiny. And now for the fringe fact of the day, there's evidence that some loaves were intentionally made misshapen or cracked, possibly to symbolize life's imperfections, or maybe to let spirits breathe through the crust. No one agrees on the exact meaning, of course. One papyrus says it's ritual. Another says it's clumsy fingers. Scholars still argue whether this was deliberate symbolism or just a natural outcome of inconsistent heat. Either way, you now look at your loaf with new respect. That lumpy, crunchy, slightly uneven bread is either a spiritual artifact or a mistake, and either way, it's yours. Back at the tabun, a fresh fire is being prepared. A man drops a reed basket full of yet unbaked dough with a grunt, and someone from across the courtyard yells at him in a tone that translates universally as, "Don't drop the dough, genius." You exhale slowly. The smell of baking bread, the distant laughter, and the ever-present wind all merge into a sleepy lullaby. You sit on the edge of a low wall, your hands warm from the heat, your mouth still full of chewy history. No rush now. Bread will bake. Wind will blow. And soon, the stars will rise over the Nile. The stars are not quite out yet, but the sky is softening. Shadows stretch long over the courtyards as the last of the day's light washes the clay walls in pink and gold. You stay seated on your low perch, chewing slowly on the edge of a still warm flatbread that tastes like sun, smoke, and determination. Across from you, the same woman who helped you knead earlier is now slapping out the next round of dough, thinner this time, with a purpose. This batch isn't for eating. It's for wrapping. Welcome to the world of flatbread as multi-purpose tool. In ancient Egypt, a good loaf didn't just fill your belly, it could also serve as a plate, a spoon, or, depending on how flexible you were with your hygiene standards, a sort of napkin. Soft, pliable, and endlessly recyclable, flatbread was the edible equivalent of duct tape. You're handed one of these thinner rounds. It's warm, slightly sticky, and looks like it might fall apart under its own weight, but it doesn't. It bends gracefully in your palm as someone ladles a thick stew of lentils, onions, and maybe a hint of crushed fish onto the center. You instinctively reach for a spoon, then remember, you are the spoon now. Tearing off a corner of the bread, you scoop carefully. It holds. You lift. It doesn't tear. You bite. The bread is earthy and plain, but the stew clings to it in a satisfying, hearty way. And just like that, you understand how something so simple could become the centerpiece of an entire civilization's diet. Egyptians ate bread with everything. With stew, with beans, with dried fish, even with honey and fruit paste if they were lucky. There were no dessert trays or forks. Just hands, bread, and an unspoken agreement to ignore how sticky everyone's fingers were getting. Some flatbreads were baked crisp for dipping, others were left soft and gooey, used like tortillas to scoop and fold. It was versatile, portable, and, most importantly, cheap. Even temples and tombs show bread being used this way. Scenes carved into limestone walls depict servants offering loaves along with jugs of beer and bowls of dried dates, everything balanced on huge trays or held aloft as tribute. But not all bread was meant for daily life. Some had higher ambitions. Nearby, a different batch of dough is being prepped, this time with finely sifted flour, possibly mixed with a hint of honey or date syrup. It's patted into little discs and arranged on a clay board beside small mounds of chopped herbs. The baker explains that these are festival loaves, served during temple celebrations or harvest rituals. Sometimes they're stamped with tiny symbols, lotus flowers, sacred animals, or the name of a deity. Sometimes they're just extra soft, a kind of edible luxury that makes you feel momentarily like royalty. Historians still debate whether these fancier loaves were commonly eaten by the average Egyptian or only distributed during ceremonies. Some evidence suggests they were shared communally during feast days, others argue that most people never tasted them outside of religious contexts. Whatever the truth, these little round loaves smell different. Sweeter. Lighter. Like someone baked hope into them. And here's your quirky side note of the night, there's a theory that some flatbreads doubled as early paper substitutes, used to write messages, record numbers, or mark inventory before being eaten or tossed. This is not confirmed by all scholars, but the idea persists in a few fringe circles. Bread as memo pad? Why not? Your modern desk snacks aren't that different. You're invited to help decorate a batch. The woman hands you a twig and nods toward a tray of soft dough. You press the twig gently into the surface, forming a lopsided bird, possibly. Maybe it's a crocodile. She squints, tilts her head, then shrugs and smiles. Good enough. All around you, people are baking, eating, laughing. Kids run by with half-eaten loaves in hand, trailing crumbs like tiny, ancient Hansels and Gretels. Someone's arguing with a goat. A dog snoozes in the shade of a kiln wall. A man sings tunelessly while stirring a pot. The whole scene has a kind of rhythmic harmony, flour, fire, wind, repeat. And through it all, the bread keeps coming. You take another bite of your own flatbread. It's cooling now, but still pliable. The inside is soft, almost fluffy, with the faintest hint of sourness from the wild yeast. You wonder how long it would last if left out. A day. 2. Probably not more. But that's okay. Bread wasn't meant to last. It was meant to be made, shared, consumed, and forgotten, until the next morning, when the fire is stoked, the flour ground, and the cycle begins again. Somewhere nearby, a clay jar is being cleaned. It had held flour, maybe beer, maybe both. Someone knocks the dust out of it, sets it on its side to dry, and starts measuring out grain for the next round of mixing. The wind picks up. You feel it at your back, tugging at your sleeves like a sleepy friend telling you it's time to move on. But for now, you sit. A full belly. Warm hands. Bread crumbs on your chin. And the comforting certainty that tomorrow, just like today, will begin with flour, fire, and the smell of dough rising gently in the wind. The sun begins its slow descent behind the palm-lined horizon, and the sky deepens into a dull, rosy amber. Your arms are dusted with flour, your tunic smells like smoke, and somewhere in your hair, there's still a coriander seed from a child's prank involving the spice basket. You hardly notice. You're watching something far more fascinating, bread baking in the open air, under a sky that's still releasing heat from the long Egyptian day. You step over to where a few women are crouched near an odd contraption. It looks like an upside-down clay pot with a wide opening at the base. This, you learn, is a type of portable oven, shallow, makeshift, and often built from leftover pottery shards and mud brick fragments. Firewood is piled neatly nearby, twisted reeds, date palm branches, and dung cakes, all arranged for maximum heat and minimum fuss. Someone stirs the embers with a charred stick. Another woman holds a flat disk of dough in both hands, her fingers spread like wings. She nods at you, then, quick as a blink, flips the dough onto the convex surface. It sizzles quietly. The scent that rises is heavenly, warm, slightly toasted grain with a sharp bite of singed chaff. Here in the open courtyard, baking is part cooking, part survival, and part performance art. The wind snakes between buildings, lifting ash and carrying the scent of hot bread through every alley and room. Children follow the aroma like bees to nectar, forming a loose circle of hopeful beggars waiting for the first done round to be tossed toward them. You observe how the wind works in their favor. On hotter days, like today, the desert air turns these surfaces into natural griddles. Some families simply lay dough onto heated stones, sun-warmed all morning. Others bury their bread in a shallow fire pit, then let the desert wind act as both fan and oven, encouraging the crust to form faster, more evenly. The breeze is not just background noise, it's part of the cooking team. You try your hand at one of the open-air methods, laying a thin sheet of dough directly onto a sun-baked rock slab. It hisses on contact. Your heart skips, but the baker beside you grins approvingly. "Now wait," she says softly in her dialect, her tone gentle and amused, like a parent teaching a toddler not to poke the fire. You wait. The surface bubbles slowly. A crust begins to form. The wind nudges a curl of ash across your sandals. You've never made something so primitive, so deliberate, so elemental, and yet it feels completely right. Not everyone in ancient Egypt had access to fireproof clay ovens. In rural or poorer communities, these open-air methods were the standard, not a backup. The ingenuity of using the environment, sun, wind, and sand, as part of the kitchen is something that modern chefs in five-star restaurants would find wildly poetic. But here, it's just called making dinner. Scholars still debate how widespread this method truly was. Were open-air bread stations a temporary invention? Or did most of Egypt, outside the temple economy and noble estates, rely on this very setup every single day? Archaeological evidence points both ways: clay ovens buried in ancient homes, but also ash pits with no structure at all. There may have been a rich diversity in baking traditions, based on class, geography, or even seasonal weather. In any case, you're standing in the middle of it now. The sound of crackling fire, the slap of dough, and the rustling wind form a soft rhythm. There's no rush, no timers, no preset heat. Everything is judged by smell, by feel, by watching the bread's edges puff just enough before the center gives up and turns golden. And now for your quirky fact of the hour. Some evidence suggests that bread was occasionally baked using overturned pots set on tripods, with coals heaped around the edges, turning them into makeshift ovens. The trick was to flip the bread halfway through without burning your fingers, or your patience. Naturally, This technique was perfected by mothers, grandmothers, and anyone with the nerve to challenge molten clay with bare hands. You crouch beside one such pot now, watching a woman carefully lift the lid to peek inside. The heat rushes out in a wave. Her eyes narrow. She nods. With practiced speed, she reaches in using a pair of reed tongs and extracts a round loaf. It's golden brown, with slightly burnt edges and a soft belly. Not bad for an oven made of nothing but clay, sand, and sheer willpower. You glance down at your own attempt. It's edible. Mostly. The bottom is a little black. The top is still pale. One edge is suspiciously doughy. The wind wasn't quite on your side. Still, the woman nods politely. She tears off a piece and hands it to a passing child, who accepts it with a solemnity usually reserved for holy relics. You grin. You're officially part of the bread team now. The sun has dipped further. Dusk bleeds purple across the horizon. A few lanterns flicker to life. Somewhere, someone is already preparing the next batch of dough, because tomorrow's bread waits for no one. You sit on a stone bench, back warmed by the dying heat of the fire pit, and let the last few minutes of golden light wash over your face. In your hand, a simple flatbread, baked by air, by fire, and by your own clumsy effort. You tear a piece, chew slowly, and taste the day, grainy, imperfect, and just right. Night finally stretches its velvet fingers across the village, pulling shadows into corners and quiet into doorways. The fires burn lower now, reduced to a soft glow of embers and faint wisps of smoke curling up into the desert sky. It's cooler, just slightly, and the wind has changed, no longer a sharp, dry breath from the south but a gentler, slower gust that brushes the back of your neck like a lullaby. You're still holding a crust of your wind-baked bread, now cool and slightly tough, but comforting all the same. Around you, the evening rhythm has begun, a slow winding down of the day's labor. And here, amid yawns and firelight, is the ritual of nighttime bread. A few women gather near a flat woven mat, carrying the last baked loaves of the day in wide reed baskets. These aren't for eating. Not right away. These are bread offerings, wrapped in linen cloth or tucked into small clay containers, destined for doorways, household shrines, or tomorrow's temple visit. In ancient Egypt, bread wasn't just food. It was a conversation with the divine. A small oil lamp flickers beside the mat. One woman leans forward and presses a thumbprint into the soft top of a still warm loaf, murmuring something under her breath, a name, maybe a wish. This was common. Simple loaves were often inscribed or marked with symbols of protection, ink signs, lines representing fields, tiny zigzags mimicking waves of the Nile. Some were left for household gods. Others were burned intentionally, a smoky offering rising toward the stars. Historians still argue whether these ritual loaves were eaten afterward or left to decay in place. Some evidence suggests they were buried near the home or crumbled into garden soil. Others believe the priesthood collected them and redistributed them as part of temple rations. In any case, the act of setting aside bread, giving it meaning beyond hunger, gave the average Egyptian a daily connection to the divine. And here's your quirky tidbit of the evening: archaeologists have discovered mummified loaves in tombs, so well preserved by Egypt's dry climate that they're still recognizable as actual bread thousands of years later. Some are charred, some broken, some misshapen, but all unmistakably loaves, tucked beside the dead as if the afterlife required a packed lunch. You're invited to help wrap one such offering loaf. The cloth is coarse but soft, woven from flax fibers, and dyed faintly with red ochre. You place the bread inside, fold the corners, and tie a simple knot. There's something quieting about it. A small ceremony in your hands. The woman next to you gives you a nod, not of approval exactly, but of inclusion. Meanwhile, over in another corner, a group of children are playing a game that involves stacking stale bread into precarious towers, trying to build the tallest one before it topples. The winner gets the last bit of date honey spread, a rare treat scraped from the bottom of a jar and licked clean. You watch the tower wobble. It falls. Laughter. The bread used here is yesterday's batch, hardened from a full day of sun and wind. Not spoiled, just firm, crackly, and good for toasting. And that's exactly what the men nearby are doing now, placing the old loaves back onto hot stones, reviving them with a dash of oil and a sprig of fenugreek. Tomorrow's breakfast, already in motion. There is a sense of circularity in all this. Bread is made, eaten, saved, offered, toasted, reimagined. Nothing goes to waste. Even crumbs are swept into baskets to feed the chickens, or mixed with water and left to ferment, a kind of proto-beer slurry that only the most adventurous villagers dare sip. You lean back against the wall of the courtyard, the clay still warm from the day's heat. Overhead, stars begin to puncture the indigo sky. You can hear someone humming, a song with no words, just a series of notes passed down like recipes and rituals. And now comes a quieter moment. One of the elders is preparing sleep bread, a soft loaf made with milk, dates, and a touch of crushed coriander. It's a tradition among some households, bread before bed. Not a feast, not even a meal, just something warm, sweet, and grounding. A way to quiet the stomach and the mind. You're handed a piece. It's slightly spongy, fragrant, and unexpectedly tender. You bite into it, and for a moment, the taste pulls you into complete stillness. It's not just food, it's comfort, memory, a lullaby you can chew. As the fire dies to coals and the last of the pots are scrubbed with sand and set upside down to dry, the night deepens. The wind, once busy helping bake the bread, now rustles gently through the rush mats and linen curtains. It's no longer a tool, just a whisper. You curl up on your reed mat beside the cooling hearth. Crumbs in your lap, warmth in your chest, the taste of sleep bread still on your tongue. And for the first time since you arrived in this strange, distant time, you feel full. Morning returns not with fanfare, but with the faintest golden light creeping over the mud brick walls. The air still holds the cool hush of the pre-dawn hour, and everything is cloaked in that soft, hazy blue that exists only between dreams and waking. You open your eyes slowly, crusty with the dry night air, and shift under your linen shawl. A rooster calls somewhere in the distance, dramatically, as if announcing a royal decree, though no one seems to care. You're not alone. Around you, people begin to stir. A woman stokes a small hearth with sleepy hands. A child mumbles in his sleep, clutching a dried palm frond like a stuffed toy. The village is yawning to life, and naturally, the first order of business is bread. But not just any bread. This is starter bread, the sacred, slightly funky dough scrap left over from the day before, brought out like a sleepy animal from its resting jar. The mother of all loaves. You peek into a worn clay bowl and see it bubbling gently, alive again after a night under cloth and stars. It smells, tangy. Like forgotten yogurt and ambition. This lump of dough is key. Without it, there's no fermentation. No rise. No softness. It's the soul of Egyptian bread making, not made fresh each time, but fed, kept warm, carried between households like a family heirloom. In fact, some archaeologists believe these starters were passed down for generations, guarded like living treasure. You're invited to feed the starter. You add a handful of flour. A little water. Stir. The mix hisses faintly, then settles back into its slow, gurgling sleep. Historians still argue whether this kind of sourdough culture was truly understood or simply used out of habit. Did they know it was yeast and bacteria doing the work? Probably not. But they knew what made bread puff, and that was enough. Outside, the wind has returned. Early, but gentle. It sweeps through the alleyways, lifting fine dust into golden ribbons. It catches your shawl and tugs playfully at your sleeves, as if to say, time to get back to work. And so it begins again. Grain is measured. Stones are prepared. But this morning, you're taken to a different part of the village, toward a larger, more complex structure with higher walls and cleaner surroundings. This is the estate bakery, the professional side of the bread world. Here, bread isn't made one loaf at a time. It's baked in hundreds. Perhaps thousands. This bread feeds workers, servants, and even teams of laborers along the Nile. The estate bakery is an ancient assembly line, and today, you're a very sleepy intern. At the center stands a large flat area, swept and packed hard from years of use. Baskets of sifted emmer flour are stacked beside a raised platform, where several women are already forming neat little dough domes with lightning speed. You blink. They've shaped 10 in the time it took you to finish yawning. Some of the loaves are destined for beer bread, a hearty variety mixed with water and wild yeast, then partially fermented to be used not for eating, but for brewing. That's right, the base of beer in Egypt wasn't malted grain, but half-baked bread soaked and strained, left to bubble into something vaguely alcoholic. Not quite Oktoberfest, but certainly effective. Your next job is to line up the loaves for the communal ovens. These are built directly into the structure of the estate wall, rows of vaulted, open-mouthed ovens with soot-darkened brick and long-handled paddles stacked beside them. Each one is preheated by building a small fire inside, then swept clean and loaded with loaves before being sealed briefly with stone or clay stoppers. It's loud. It's smoky. And it's almost operatic in rhythm. A woman calls out a count. Another slaps a loaf onto a peel. Someone else pushes it in with a precise, practiced shove. The wind howls through the open back wall, drawing the smoke upward, keeping the ovens from becoming unbearable. As you wait, you're handed a chunk of something new, seeded bread, made with coriander, flax, and a few wayward sesame seeds probably picked up through trade. It's drier than the flatbreads you've grown used to, but incredibly fragrant. Toasted spice, chewy crust, and a faint bitterness from the crust's char. It's clearly meant to last longer, maybe for travel or ration storage. Some loaves here are baked into cone-shaped molds, thick at the base and narrowing to a rounded top. These bread cones are designed to steam from the inside out, retaining moisture while developing a caramelized shell. They're not pretty, but they feed a lot of mouths, and if made well, they don't require sauce or stews to be satisfying. Here's a delightfully odd fact: some of these cone-shaped loaves have been found in tombs, preserved by the dry climate, still bearing fingerprints and thumb dents of the bakers who made them. The last human touch, frozen in time beside an uneaten meal for the afterlife. You pause beside one of the ovens and watch the flickering firelight dance across the bread domes inside. A few minutes more. One woman hums a baking chant, not religious, not formal, just a melodic list of ingredients and instructions. You find yourself nodding along. It sounds like a recipe. Or maybe a prayer. Or both. The smell here is different from the village hearths. It's stronger, richer, edged with spice and charcoal and purpose. This bread isn't just to eat. It's to move people. To power ships. To fuel temples. To feed armies. A voice calls out. It's time to pull the bread. You step forward, hands hesitant, and take up a wooden paddle. Carefully, you reach into the mouth of the oven, sliding beneath a row of finished loaves. They come out crackling, steaming, heavy with promise. You stack them in a basket lined with linen. The wind rushes through again, cooling your cheeks, tugging at the corners of your thoughts. The basket is full. Your arms are tired. Your nose is covered in soot. But your heart, unexpectedly, feels full too. You're beginning to understand, in Egypt, bread isn't just a product. It's a process. A ritual. A rhythm. A language spoken through flour and fire. And you're learning to speak it. The basket is warm against your hip as you walk, filled to the brim with newly baked loaves. Each one is slightly different, some darker, some cracked, a few accidentally fused together in the oven like bread conjoined twins. You don't mind. The weight feels good. Real. Earned. You follow the flow of others carrying similar baskets down a packed dirt path, past low mud brick buildings with sun-bleached walls and doorways just high enough to duck through. These loaves aren't heading to the temple or the estate storehouse. These are going to the fields. A mile or so outside the village, where the green banks of the Nile fade into the shimmer of gold sand, men and women are already gathering for the day's labor. They're pulling irrigation ropes, repairing canals, checking papyrus reed fences, and guiding water buffalo with long, lazy whistles. This is where bread finds its next role, as currency. Yes, here in ancient Egypt, bread isn't just breakfast. It's your paycheck. Wages for workers, whether hauling stone, digging channels, or painting the walls of tombs, were often paid in the form of loaves and jugs of beer. A day's labor might earn you 5 loaves and 2 swallows of beer, or more if you had a particularly backbreaking task. There's no bronze coin jingling in your pocket. No scribbled banknotes. Just bread. The overseer, a tall man with sunburned cheeks and an expression like he's perpetually unimpressed, gestures for the baskets to be placed in a shaded spot. He quickly inspects a loaf, knocks it with his knuckles, and nods. Good crust. Fair weight. Payment approved. You hand yours over and step back, wiping your palms against your tunic. Beside you, another young man pulls a small piece from his day's allotment and chews slowly, eyes on the canal. You nod. He nods. It's a whole conversation. This isn't charity. This is the economy. And bread is the bank. Historians still debate how strictly this system was enforced. Were workers actually paid every day? Did the temple scribes keep tallies by weight or by count? There's evidence on both sides, ledger tablets with neat hieroglyphic columns, and also graffiti in tombs complaining about late rations. Some things never change. But it wasn't just laborers. Priests were paid in bread. Artists. Servants. Even government officials, though their loaves were likely larger, fancier, maybe with a dash of honey or sprinkled coriander. Your rank often determined the type of bread you received. Flatbread for the common folk. Cone loaves for mid-tier staff. Seeded and sweetened varieties for scribes and nobles. You pause under the shade of a fig tree, watching a scribe carve tiny lines into a clay tablet. He's recording today's ration disbursement, 1 loaf at a time. The stylus clicks softly with each mark. He doesn't even look up. Nearby, a group of field hands squat in a circle, tearing their loaves into chunks and dipping them into a communal bowl of something thick and yellowish. You're invited to join, and you do. The bowl is filled with fermented lentil mash, pungent, earthy, and weirdly comforting. The bread soaks it up like a sponge. One man swears it helps with strength. Another insists it's good for stomach problems. A third just shrugs and dunks again. There's a rhythm to this, too. Work. Break. Bread. Repeat. You glance at your fingers, sticky from lentils and dust, and think of your modern lunch breaks, microwave burritos, plastic forks, a desk keyboard smudged with crumbs. This is something else. Slower. Shared. Slightly messier. But deeply human. And now for your quirky fact of the morning: bread wasn't just for wages and meals. It was also used as tax. That's right, government tax collectors would accept baskets of bread as part of what was owed. Not your best loaf, of course. Usually the second-tier stuff, slightly stale, but still edible. In fact, large households often baked extra bread just for taxes, storing it in cool, shaded rooms until it was collected. You finish your piece and thank the circle of workers, who respond with grunts and raised eyebrows, friendly, if not particularly expressive. Then it's time to head back toward the village, your empty basket swinging loosely in your hand. On the way, you pass a woman walking with a jar balanced perfectly on her head and a bundle of bread under her arm. She hums a tune you vaguely recognize, something you heard last night, maybe. Something old. The wind picks up again, brushing your face with the scent of cumin, hay, and smoke. It lifts the edges of your tunic and sets the trees whispering. Even now, it seems to follow the bread. Or maybe the bread follows it. You're beginning to see it now: bread is everywhere in Egypt. It fills stomachs, pays debts, flavors the air, and oils the gears of the kingdom itself. It's more than food. It's infrastructure. You return to the bakery courtyard, where more dough is already rising in the shade, quietly ballooning under linen wraps. Someone offers you a sip of beer, thick, warm, slightly sour. You accept. It tastes like the bread you helped make, but melted into liquid form. Earthy. Ancient. You close your eyes and lean into the wall behind you. Warm clay against your back. The sun peeking through your lashes. The wind tugging gently at your sleeves again. It feels like something sacred. Like rest. Like you've been fed by time itself. By now, your fingers know the rhythm. They fold the dough without thinking, pat it into rough rounds, tuck the edges under. Your palms are dusted with flour that hasn't come from a bag but from a reed basket scooped from a grindstone. You aren't a guest anymore, you're part of the village's daily choreography. And today, your teacher leads you into one of the more curious corners of this ancient routine: bread for the dead. The path to the necropolis is lined with date palms and quiet. Not somber, exactly, just quieter. Fewer chickens. Fewer children. The wind, as always, follows, moving dust in lazy spirals. You pass tombs carved into low hills and sunken stone entrances leading to chambers below. Some of these hold nobles. Others, temple workers. A few still wait, half prepared, for occupants who haven't yet arrived. You're helping prepare a funerary offering tray, and yes, it includes bread, lots of it. But not just any bread. These loaves are carefully shaped, often with cone or dome tops, sometimes marked with thumbprints or smooth, intentional ridges. They represent continuity, nourishment in the afterlife, and, practically speaking, a means of feeding the soul while it makes its long commute through the underworld. You step into a low, shaded prep room where two women are wrapping loaves in linen. Others are stacking small, hardened cakes into clay trays. These aren't meant to be soft or fresh. In fact, they're intentionally dried out, almost like crackers, meant to last the journey into eternity. You're handed a small, flat loaf and shown how to score it with a reed stylus. You carve a simple ank shape, slightly wobbly, and press a few sesame seeds into the surface. It feels oddly ceremonial, like signing your name in a guest book for someone going on a very long trip. Historians still puzzle over how often the dead were fed. Was it symbolic, or did families really return to tombs regularly with fresh bread? Some records suggest regular festivals where the tomb was reopened, the dead visited and offered new food. Others argue that most offerings were one-time rituals. Still, the bread was made with care, whether it was going to be eaten by someone or something else. And here's your fringe fact of the section: in some elite tombs, archaeologists have found fake bread, loaves made from clay, painted to resemble real food. Why? Possibly because real bread spoiled too quickly. Possibly because the tomb builders couldn't spare the real thing. Or maybe, just maybe, the belief was that symbolic bread was enough. After all, the gods knew the difference. You help load a tray with several types: a flat round with date paste, a hardened cone, a sweetened roll. Each loaf is accompanied by a small bowl of beer, some dried figs, and a garland of papyrus. When the tray is full, two men lift it carefully and begin the short walk down to the tomb entrance. You follow at a respectful distance, your shadow long behind you in the low sun. Inside the tomb chamber, incense curls through the air. The wall paintings show fields, cattle, servants, and, of course, bakers, always baking. Bread is so central to Egyptian life that it follows a person even into the depictions of their eternal paradise. There's a scene where a deceased noble reclines on a couch while a servant offers him a loaf, as if to say, "Yes, even here, you will eat well." The tray is placed on a stone slab. One woman steps forward and recites a brief blessing. It's quiet. Simple. The kind of phrase passed down not through books but through whispered memory. Then they all step back, the moment sealed like the tomb itself. You walk out into the sun again, blinking. It's hotter now. The wind tugs at your robe, as if urging you back to the world of the living. And back in the village, life resumes. The bakery is busy again. Children race around the courtyard with bits of crust in hand. One elderly man is already nibbling the edge of a sweet loaf while criticizing the next batch's size, shape, and ambition. You sit on a stone bench, chewing slowly, watching dough rise beneath linen. You think about all the places bread has been today, in fields, in temples, in tombs. Given as gifts. Paid as wages. Laid at the feet of gods. It's just flour, water, and heat. And yet, it's more than that. It's memory. It's promise. It's a conversation between now and forever. The wind rustles the hanging palm leaves above your head. You tilt your face toward the sky and breathe in the scent of flour, ash, and the faintest hint of honey. You are full, again. And not just in your stomach. The wind is back, and now it seems to know your name. It plays at the edges of your tunic as you make your way through the shaded alleys of the village. You're on an errand, something simple, but important, fetching grinding stones from the communal storehouse. Because today, you're going to make flour. Not just use it. Make it. From scratch. You enter a low-roofed building where the air is cool and dry, thick with the scent of ground grain and stone dust. It's quieter here, no children playing tag between baskets, no animals bleating for attention. Just the steady rhythm of quern stones, circular and worn from generations of palms pushing, scraping, grinding. You're directed to a pair of stones, the bottom fixed and slightly concave, the top a round hand-held grinder. You kneel, scoop a handful of emmer wheat from a nearby basket, and pour it slowly into the center. Then you begin. Push. Scrape. Drag. Breathe. It's a rhythm that immediately feels older than you. Older than anyone. As if your muscles remember something your mind does not. Within minutes, your forearms burn. Your hands are already roughened. But you keep going, catching glimpses of tiny golden flecks in the grooves of the stone, fragments of husk, germ, chaff. Making flour is not a passive act. It's physical, repetitive, and strangely meditative. It takes time. Sometimes all morning. A single family might need several hours of grinding to produce enough for their daily bread. You begin to understand why a good stone was passed down like treasure, and why bread, despite its simplicity, was never truly cheap. Historians still debate whether every household ground its own grain or relied on central mills. Some suggest larger estates had full-time millers, others argue that communal labor like this was the norm. Either way, someone's wrists were always sore. You pause to catch your breath, then examine your progress. The crushed grain is coarse and slightly uneven, more like meal than flour, really, but perfectly usable. Nearby, someone sifts their own batch through a woven basket, the fine dust falling like ancient snow. You try it. The husks catch, the rest drops through. You've just made your first flour. Congratulations. You're officially prehistoric. And here's your quirky tidbit of the section. Evidence shows that ancient Egyptians sometimes added sand on purpose while grinding, either to aid the process or simply as an unavoidable side effect of using sandstone tools. As a result, over time, dental wear in mummies shows significant grinding and tooth flattening. Yes, bread gave them strength, and also terrible dental records. Back in the courtyard, you bring your flour to the prep table. It's still warm from the friction of your effort. The woman in charge, stern, dust-covered, and possibly made entirely of calluses, inspects your handful and gives the faintest nod of approval. High praise, in these parts. Now the dough begins again, flour, water, maybe a pinch of old starter. You knead with sore wrists, stretching, folding, pressing with your full body. It's messier than before. The wind kicks up and swirls flour through the air like pollen. You're coughing, laughing, covered in it, and so is everyone else. It's chaos, but somehow peaceful. As you rest the dough, you glance across the yard and notice a small figure hunched near a corner fire pit. It's an elderly man, too old to grind, too frail to carry. But he's baking. Not fancy loaves, not festival rounds, just tiny bread animals, shaped like frogs, birds, cats. He rolls them with gnarled fingers and sets them gently on a hot stone. You wander over. He offers you one, a tiny turtle-shaped loaf with sesame eyes. You bite into it. It's slightly overdone, but delicious. He doesn't speak much, just grunts and points. You sit beside him and make your own, a lumpy fish, a crooked ibis. You both laugh. Historians rarely write about this, the playful side of ancient baking. The quiet, gentle creativity of shaping loaves not out of need, but out of affection. Offerings, gifts for children, edible toys. But here it is, happening beside you, right now. You leave your dough to rise and join others for lunch, fresh bread with dried figs, salty cheese, and a jug of warm beer. You tear the bread, dip it in the fig paste, and close your eyes. It's sweet, savory, and satisfying. Someone passes a peeled garlic clove. You bite it by mistake. Your eyes water. Laughter erupts around you. You're one of them now. And just as the meal winds down, the wind returns again, stronger now. It howls through the bakery's open walls, scattering a basket of chaff, whirling into your resting dough. Someone tries to cover it, but it's too late. A burst of flour goes airborne, and everyone is instantly coated in a fine, white fog. You wipe your eyes and breathe deep. It smells like work. It smells like life. It smells like bread. The wind calms by late afternoon, settling into a lazy drift, as if even the desert itself needs a nap. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard. The last batch of dough sits rising beneath linen cloths, their bellies puffed like sleepy cats. The grindstone has fallen silent. The laughter from lunch still lingers, but softer now. Everyone's moving slower. The heat does that to people. You're invited to help with a special batch, one not made every day. This bread is destined for the market. While most Egyptians baked at home or relied on estate bakeries, certain loaves, especially flavored or ceremonial ones, were sold in small village stalls or busy urban streets. Today, it's honey bread. The sweet stuff. Not the cloying kind you find in modern wrappers, but rich, sticky loaves flavored with real honey, date syrup, and a dusting of ground carob pods. You watch as a woman unwraps a jar sealed with linen and beeswax. She scoops out the thick amber liquid and lets it drip into a stone mixing bowl. It takes its time, lazy, like the wind. You add flour, a bit of oil, a crushed fig or two. The dough is stickier than usual, clinging to your fingers like an affectionate pet. Kneading it is messy, but strangely satisfying. It smells incredible, like hot sugar, dirt, and the faint echo of a flower. These loaves are smaller, shaped like miniature suns, round with notched edges, marked with a reed stamp before baking. Some are filled with soft cheese or pounded sesame. Others are left plain, letting the honey do the talking. You ask why this isn't made every day. The answer is simple: honey is precious. Beekeeping existed in ancient Egypt, but it was labor-intensive. Hives were often built along canals or near wildflowers, and smoke was used to calm the bees, just as modern beekeepers do. But honey wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. It was medicine. An offering. A royal ingredient. And historians still debate exactly how accessible honey bread was. Did commoners get it only at festivals? Did village bakers make small, affordable versions? Or was it a rare treat hoarded by the wealthy and the gods? The evidence, as usual, is mixed and sticky. You shape a few loaves yourself, your hands now clumsy with sweetness. You're grinning, covered in flour and sugar like a child. The woman beside you raises an eyebrow, then smiles. She hands you a tiny clay bead and presses it gently into the top of your loaf, a charm. For good baking. For not burning. For beginner's luck. And now for your quirky fact: one ancient Egyptian recipe, inscribed on a fragment of papyrus, suggests a kind of cake made from honey and tiger nut flour, shaped into small spirals and cooked in ceramic molds. It's possibly the world's first donut, or at least its spiritual ancestor. You set your honey loaves beside the others on a reed tray, ready to be baked. They'll go to market tomorrow morning, carried in wide baskets balanced on the heads of women with better posture than you'll ever have. Meanwhile, across the courtyard, someone is preparing another kind of bread entirely, one not meant to be eaten. This is modeling dough. Shaped into little idols, animals, and fertility figures. Dried, sometimes painted. These are ritual figures, not food. Or maybe they're both. In Egypt, the line between sustenance and spirit is always soft. You shape one yourself, a little crocodile. It looks more like a lump with legs, but no one corrects you. They just chuckle. The sun begins to sink toward the western hills. Golden light spills across the village, warming the bricks, softening the edges of everything. You take a seat with your back against a grain bin, holding a crust from earlier in the day, now cool and dry but still good. The market women are already chatting about tomorrow's prices. Will the honey bread sell faster if it's shaped like a lotus? Should they toast the sesame seeds longer? What if they mix in almond paste, if they can afford almonds? They argue gently, like friends who have done this dance before. Bread here isn't just food. It's business. Community. Art. You listen, chewing slowly, crumbs falling into your lap like soft punctuation. Then someone begins to sing. Not loudly. Not for performance. Just a quiet, repetitive melody with no beginning or end. A bread song. One that helps pass the time while waiting for dough to rise or coals to glow. You recognize the rhythm. It sounds like the kneading chant from the estate bakery, slowed down and softened by the honey air. The wind stirs again, lifting the edge of the cloth covering the final batch of loaves. You step forward, fold it back down gently, and sit beside the tray. Watching. Smelling. Waiting. Because bread is always becoming. Always almost ready. Like you. Evening has arrived, brushing the tops of the palm trees with a copper glow. The air is cooling, and the light is slow and honey thick. You followed bread all day, kneaded it, shaped it, burned your fingers on it, laughed around it, and now you're being pulled toward its final, strange transformation, bread as medicine. Yes. Bread for healing. You're led to a corner of the village near a garden patch, where a healer works surrounded by jars, bundles of herbs, and an odd assortment of tools, shaped stones, bronze pins, and what appears to be a crocodile skull mounted on a stick. You choose not to ask about that just yet. The healer, a woman with deep-set eyes and hands that seem made of bark and smoke, motions for you to sit. She gestures toward a mortar filled with old, dry bread, pulverized into a fine dust. She adds honey. Some kind of oil. A pinch of ground resin. Then she begins to stir. This, she explains softly, is a bread poultice, used for drawing out infection or soothing wounds. The bread holds the moisture, the honey fights bacteria, and the herbs do their quiet, leafy magic. You lean closer. It smells, okay. Medicinal. Damp. Like your grandmother's cupboard during flu season. Historians still argue whether these bread-based remedies were more symbolic than effective. But archaeological texts, from tomb walls to medical papyri, describe hundreds of such treatments. Bread mixed with goose fat for burns. Crumb and milk compresses for sore muscles. Even baked dough cooled and bound to the head for fevers. And here's your quirky fact, the Ebers Papyrus, one of Egypt's oldest medical texts, includes a recipe for curing toothaches using bread soaked in beer and herbs, applied directly to the gums. Dental Hygiene, Ancient Edition. You help apply a poultice to a young boy's scraped knee. He winces, but the healer soothes him with a lullaby that's half spell, half song. The bread bandage is tied on with soft linen, and the boy's eyes flutter with relief. Later, you assist in making a batch of healing cakes, small loaves mixed with carob, fenugreek, and date pulp, baked until just firm and used to settle upset stomachs. They're handed out sparingly, tucked into reed baskets and carried home with care. And across the village, another kind of healing is taking place. Near the largest house, a woman has just given birth. The midwives emerge with tired, proud smiles. Bread is brought, not to feed the baby, but to mark the moment. A fertility loaf, shaped like a womb, is placed at the threshold of the house. It's symbolic, protective, celebratory. It smells of cumin and coriander and charcoal, and it means, we survived. Again. Someone passes you a piece of it, still warm, slightly sweet. You chew slowly, sitting beneath a tree hung with drying herbs. It's quiet here. The sky is fading into its deepest blue. Stars blink into place like old friends arriving late. Nearby, a man with a limp sits beside the healer. She gives him a bread balm to rub into his knee, thick, warm, and slightly pungent. She wraps it with linen and murmurs something under her breath. A thank you, maybe. Or a wish. It strikes you that bread, in this place, isn't just sustenance. It's a gesture. A response. A way of saying, I see your pain. Here is what I have. Let this help. You remember the bread animals. The temple loaves. The funeral offerings. The market honey cakes. The beer bricks. And now, this, bread that heals. Even back in your own world, echoes of this remain. You've heard of toast and tea for colds. You've tasted warm bread when you were too sad to eat anything else. Bread knows things, somehow. It wraps around our hurts and fills the quiet. The healer hands you a tiny loaf, no bigger than your palm. It's a blessing loaf, she says. No herbs. No oils. Just flour, water, and a whisper of salt. You press it between your fingers. It's imperfect. Cracked. But warm. She nods. You don't need to say anything. As you walk back through the darkening village, the breeze curls around your ankles. It carries the scent of ovens cooling, stews finishing, old smoke and soft earth. The fires have burned low, and most of the courtyards are quiet now. A dog yawns. A child snores gently beside a basket of grain. You sit again by the hearth where it all began. Crumbs in your lap. Ash on your fingers. A blessing loaf tucked inside your sash. The stars will overhead, bright and patient. And your breath slows. The night deepens, and with it, so does the hush that falls over the village. Only the occasional whisper of the wind or a faint animal call breaks the quiet. But you're not quite done yet, not before you witness the strangest, most mesmerizing transformation of all, bread turned into ritual. Tonight is special. The moon is high, pale as bleached limestone, casting silver light across rooftops and palm leaves. You're invited to a small moon rite, held not in a temple, but at a humble household altar, the kind found in many Egyptian homes. No grand pillars, no gold or incense, just clay figurines, woven amulets, and, as ever, bread. You enter the courtyard quietly. A family has gathered, their faces soft with candlelight. On the low altar sits a flat basket lined with lotus leaves. Inside are 7 small loaves, each shaped into a different symbol, sun, moon, snake, scarab, reed, and heart. These are offering breads, crafted not for eating, but for sending messages. The eldest woman begins a chant, not in perfect verse, not memorized from a priest's manual, but passed down through generations. The words wash over you like river current, soft, melodic, ancient. Each loaf is lifted, turned slowly in the moonlight, and placed carefully beside a bowl of beer and a small carved falcon. You kneel to help light the last of the palm oil lamps, their flames flickering like fireflies caught in clay jars. The scent of smoke and slightly scorched bread drifts into the sky, like a sigh to the gods. And here's your mainstream fact: home altars were a common part of daily spiritual life in ancient Egypt. Even peasants and workers maintained small spaces to honor deities like Bes, protector of households, or Hathor, goddess of motherhood and music. These rituals were private, personal, and yes, often included bread. But historians still debate the exact meanings behind these household loaves. Were they tied to specific deities? Seasonal changes? Dreams? Illness? The loaves themselves remain largely unmarked, their symbolism guessed at, not confirmed. Like dreams made of dough. You help lay one more offering, a small circle of bread brushed with honey and pressed with caraway seeds. It's meant to represent continuity, they say. Or eternity. Or maybe it's just delicious. No one seems entirely sure. Your quirky tidbit. In some tombs, archaeologists have discovered tiny altars shaped like loaves of bread, complete with carved crust and crumb texture. These weren't made of dough at all, but of stone or faience, eternal bread, imperishable, forever on the offering table. After the final chant, a moment of silence. The stars overhead are impossibly sharp. The moon casts long, slow shadows across the earth. No one speaks. Even the wind seems to pause. Then, in the quiet, someone starts to hum, a lullaby, barely audible. The kind you imagine might have been sung 1,000 years ago, in this very courtyard, by someone else sitting where you now sit, watching candlelight shimmer across the faces of loved ones. You rise and wander a short distance to a low wall that overlooks the riverbank. The Nile glimmers in the moonlight, lazy and endless. You can just make out a small reed boat, docked and empty, bobbing gently with the current. It looks like it's waiting for someone. Maybe it's you. There's bread on board, a few loaves wrapped in linen, tied with string. You smile. Of course there is. Back at the altar, the ritual begins to wrap up. The loaves won't be eaten. Not tonight. They'll be buried in the fields, left on doorsteps, or crumbled for birds in the morning. Some might be cast into the canal, floated away like miniature barges carrying prayers. You step quietly away from the gathering and return to the sleeping courtyard. You pass by ovens now cold, baskets empty, grindstones resting. Everything smells faintly of ash and flour. A few embers glow like tired eyes beneath soot. In the corner, your blessing loaf waits. You touch it lightly. It's hardening now, but still warm in the center. You wrap it in cloth and hold it to your chest. The day is ending, but nothing feels finished. Because in Egypt, bread never truly ends. It's reborn every morning, ground, stirred, risen, shaped, baked, shared, buried, praised. And always, always becoming. You sit by the fire pit one last time, legs tucked beneath you, head heavy, heart full. Above, the sky turns velvet. Below, the earth holds your weight like it's known you forever. You close your eyes. And in the silence, you hear it. The sound of rising dough. The breath of the desert. And your own steady pulse, echoing like footsteps on warm stone. The sky begins to pale in the east, ever so gently, like a loaf beginning to swell beneath linen before the heat touches it. You're still seated by the cold hearth, cloak draped around your shoulders, the blessing loaf pressed to your chest. The stars retreat slowly, reluctantly. Even the wind seems half asleep. And so begins your final experience with Egyptian bread, not in the oven, not in the fields, but in the telling. Because even bread has a story. And this morning, you're invited to share in one of its most curious chapters, myths and magic surrounding bread. You're guided through the quiet village to the home of an elderly scribe, a man who once served at the temple but now spends his days telling stories to children and preserving old knowledge in whatever form he can. His house smells of ink, clay, and yesterday's lentils. He beckons you close, squinting at you as if sizing up your willingness to listen. Then he tells you this. Long ago, before pharaohs wore crowns and before pyramids scraped the sky, the god Geb, lord of the earth, was said to have taught the first baker. He molded dough from the soil and dew, shaped it into a sun disk, and left it on the rocks to rise beneath Ra's gaze. That disk, they say, became the first loaf. And every time you bake, you're mimicking Geb's divine gesture. You nod. Of course. It's absurd. And it feels completely true. The scribe continues, bread appears in spells, in curses, in charms for protection. Some texts suggest placing a loaf beneath your pillow to receive dreams of guidance. Others describe whispering wishes into dough before baking it, hoping the fire will carry your desires to the gods. And here's your quirky fact of the hour. In a few tombs, archaeologists found bread with glyphs carved directly into the crust, spelling out names, prayers, or symbols of eternal life. These weren't inscriptions on papyrus, but on food. Words baked until unreadable, then eaten, or offered. Historians debate whether this was common or elite only. Was your average farmer whispering spells into dough? Or was that the business of priest bakers and royal kitchens? No one quite knows. But what's clear is this: bread was more than food. It was communication. The scribe chuckles and produces a small roll from a basket. It's tough and dry and probably a week old. But he holds it like treasure. Pressed into its top is a faint symbol, an open eye. He breaks it in half and hands you a piece. You chew slowly, imagining how many people have done this before you, bitten into bread, not just for hunger, but for hope. You rise and thank him with a bow, fingers still dusty with old crust. Outside, the village is waking. Roosters crow. Water sloshes from jars being filled. And from the bakery, the smell of dough, fresh, warm, swelling with promise. You return one last time to the baking courtyard. The fires are being coaxed back to life. The stones are glowing again. Children tumble in with sleepy hair, carrying baskets of grain. Everyone moves with practiced slowness, like dancers starting the first steps of a familiar routine. Someone hands you a lump of dough. You shape it, quietly, carefully. This one's for you. Maybe it's for breakfast. Maybe for memory. Maybe for magic. And now the world begins to hum again, the whisper of fire, the rustle of palms, the hiss of clay pots warming beside embers. You press your palm into the center of your loaf, leaving a mark. A soft, sleepy signature. This is your bread. And you've earned every crumb. The sun lifts slowly, golden and sure. You sit beside the oven, eyes half closed, the smell of baking rising around you like incense. The wind moves once more, this time not hot or sharp, but soft, wrapping itself around your shoulders like a shawl. And as you lean back against the wall, breath slowing, eyelids heavy, your final thought is not of gods or pyramids or pharaohs. It's of dough. Of hands. Of warmth. Of stories that rise, like bread. Now, as you settle in, let the images of the desert slip away like footprints beneath the Nile's edge. Let the scent of flour, smoke, and warm honey fade into the distance, replaced by nothing but the gentle rhythm of your breath. There's no more grinding to do. No more fires to tend. The last loaf has risen. The ovens have cooled. Your hands, dusty and tired, can rest now. The stories are tucked safely between the crusts of memory, ready to return when you need them. And the village, bustling with life just hours ago, is now quiet, as if even the earth has exhaled. Picture the soft fabric of linen sheets, cool against sun-kissed skin. Picture a basket of bread, fresh and warm, left waiting on a clay shelf for morning. Picture the sky over ancient Egypt, pale blue, fading into gold, dusted with stars. Whatever path brought you here tonight, whether you stumbled and tired, restless, or just curious, I hope you found comfort in the slow unfolding of another time. A place where bread was everything, a chore, a gift, a prayer, a promise. So let go now. You've wandered enough for one evening. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the breeze you once felt beside the Nile. Let your mind float like a reed boat on a still canal. Let the soft weight of sleep settle over you like flour over dough. You are safe. You are warm. You are full. And the bread has been baked.